Okay, so I have a confession to make. I am a Five Nights at Freddy's fan. Yes, I know, I'm that flavor of. And I grew up with the franchise from the very first game back in 2014. Okay, so as I was saying, I've seen FNAF evolve from this simple yet effective horror game to the convoluted mess that it is today. And recently I played the latest entry, Secret of... And I've been wanting to give my thoughts on it as a game designer. But I don't just want to discuss the positives and the negatives and give like an overall review, since there's plenty of those out there already. Instead, I'm also going to be offering some fun ideas on what I personally would have changed about the game to improve it, adding some nice visuals and mock-ups to really sell these ideas. Now, my goal here is to add the maximum amount of improvement with the minimum amount of changes. So I'm not just gonna like rewrite the whole game or something. Instead, I'm basically just pitching some things I felt could be improved or added to the game, with my ultimate goal being to make the game more fun, tense, replayable, and scary. So, let's get into it. Now, before we tackle the negative aspects, let's go over the positive ones, because honestly, I really loved the game. It was a lot of fun, the location was great, although a bit unbelievable at times with how much there was. The concept of the Mimic was truly amazing, having suits that can move around at any moment makes for some great psychological horror. Combine that with narrow areas for close quarter stealth, all topped with some amazing sequences and an amazing soundtrack. Overall, Steel Wool knocked it out of the park with this one, and they've definitely learned from the mistakes with Security Breach. The game still feels open to an extent, but is definitely a lot more linear, which I would say is actually a good thing this time around. And overall, if I had to rate it, I'd give Secret of the Mimic a solid 7 to 7.5 out of 10. I think it was a lot of fun, and I even plan on replaying it. But I think there are some gameplay aspects that are a bit surface level, and I think could use some improvements, along with some visual changes that I would make. So, with that out of the way, let's start with the first change. The first one's simple, which is to decrease the brightness and increase the contrast with the classic flashlight. I know you can change the brightness in the game, but even so, I feel like the default brightness could be a bit more intense. I found that when changing the brightness, the environment was either too bright or too dark. A simple flashlight would really fix this issue and also make the game feel a bit more scary overall. On top of that, this also plays into another idea that I have later down the line. Now, aside from this, I would also suggest to add a few other minor visual changes, like an optional motion blur setting. Listen, I know people hate it, but I think when it's done right, motion blur can really improve a scene. That's my hot take for the day, okay? I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, luckily, both of these things can already be added to the game with mods, so that's great. And so I will be using it in these examples. Now, that's really all for basic graphical changes that I would add. The game looks pretty good already by default, so time for something a bit more substantial. Now, in the game you can hide in lockers and just kind of hope that the Mimic gets a sudden burst of amnesia, which seems a little surface level for stealth. So, instead, here's what I imagined. While in the lockers, you have to manage your breathing, making sure to stay calm and unheard, holding left mouse button to inhale and letting go to exhale. However, when the Mimic is close by, you have to hold your breath so he doesn't hear you. But make sure you don't hold your breath for too long, or else... It's a simple mechanic that I feel would add a lot of tension to the hiding mechanics in the game, rather than just making it a simple action that the player does. It adds an extra layer of strategy and circumstances to consider. Personally, I like the concept of horror and stealth mechanics being rooted in quite mundane things, like your movement, breathing, or walking, since it feels a bit more realistic. These are the things that would give your position away in close-quarter stealth scenarios. Now, along with this mechanic, I would actually add a secondary option for hiding: crates. The player can quickly crawl in these and close them. They're a much more stealthy way of hiding, and thus the player doesn't have to control their breathing. But it comes at the cost of their vision. The player won't be able to know when it's safe to go back out. All you can do is go by sound, much like in FNAF 4. And in that same way, you can peek out to check if the coast is clear. Just be careful not to peek out at the wrong time, or you'll be spotted. So, I feel like these two alone would already add a lot more complexity to the game, and many moments of tension. along with a bunch of micro decisions to consider. Do I hide in the crate nearby and sacrifice my vision, or do I try and make a run for the locker? Do I hold my breath now, or do I wait till the mimic is closer? So, that's my first gameplay changing idea, adding an extra layer of tension and strategy to the stealth of the game itself. One other addition to this that I was considering was having the player also control their balance while in the lockers, since they tend to make a lot of noise. This would be done by holding your mouse still as you're controlling your breathing, but I can see this getting a bit tedious over time, so probably not. Now, that brings me to the next topic. The star of the show himself. Now, I think that the concept of the mimic is amazing. Knowing that any of these suits can move at any time makes for some amazing psychological horror. However, I feel like there's a lot of untapped potential here. First of all, I'd like to make some small visual changes, like, in my opinion, some of the suits are terrifying while others really aren't that scary at all. Of course, that makes sense since what makes something scary is entirely subjective. So, in that regard, the only thing that I would really change is make it so that the mimic's eyes are visible in each suit, with the eyes starting to glow as the suit starts moving. This would both look really cool and also act as a quick warning for the player to hide. This would also lead to the player having to really focus on the faces of the suits more for an early warning sign, and could even be played with in the game at some point with a sort of fake out. Now, aside from just creepiness, I would also add this for another reason, but that'll come up later. And funnily enough, this seems to have been the plan from the start. If you look at all the concept art and renders, the mimic's eyes are pretty much always visible. So I don't really have any clue on why this ended up being cut. Now, aside from that, the other thing that I would change is the mimic's animations. Simply put, I think they're a bit too fluid, especially when he's in the suits. Like, I get that he's very advanced, but when he's in the suit, it kind of just feels like a guy walking around rather than a robot. I think it would be way cooler to have the movements be more robotic in nature and jagged. Maybe even doing some movements that wouldn't even be possible by humans. Like, imagine sneaking around, thinking you're safe, and suddenly... On top of that, I think the mimic could be more, well, angry, I guess? We know he's learned rage pretty early on in the game, but the only time we see him use it is when he chases or catches us. Like, imagine seeing him just attacking anything and everything around the map, you know? Or just like an example at some point of him attacking something to really show what he's capable of and the danger that we're in. It would make him A, more terrifying overall, and B, it would also act as an explanation of the state of the manor. So those are the visual changes that I would make for the mimic. Let's get into some gameplay ones. Now, in the game, we see the mimic jump in and out of suits, but, like, does he just put them back when he changes? Like, what if instead the suits shifted and moved when you revisited an area? Imagine you enter an area that once seemed pretty safe, and then at a later point you come back to it and see it's just filled with suits. He moved them there, specifically to mess with you, to put you on edge, and to give himself the tactical advantage. There's nothing more terrifying than an enemy having fun messing with you. And as a nice cherry on top, I'd also position these suits in a way to make them seem more hostile, like they're ready to attack. We do already see this in the game at some points here and there, but I think we could, up that a bit more even. Now, for clarification, I don't think this needs to be a randomized thing, because I can see plenty of issues arising from this. But instead, I think it could be from a selected list of suit positions, or even like a pre-planned event in the story at some point. I can just see this being a very cool and creepy thing that can really mess with the player. So, in the game we discover that the mimic was designed to not only fit in any suit, but also copy the personality of the character. But we don't really get to see that in action, do we? I mean, the only real example of this is Chica. Hi, Editor Rio here. So, I had to add this following segment here after some additional research. I assumed that these characters were all individual characters. Like, you've got the mimic who wears the suits, then you've got Jackie, Big Top, and Dolly. But turns out, they're all the mimic, and M2 is the only actual endoskeleton there. I've seen some confusion whether this is the case, and honestly, I'm confused too. Like, how is he controlling Big Top? Why does he need to control Dolly? Like, A, she's on a rail. B, how would she operate normally then? Like, is she a spring-lock suit? Or does the mimic spend half his time as Dolly like a part-time job or something? I don't really know. But I just wanted to make this segment to say that the Mimic does take on other personalities in the suits, and for some reason it doesn't, feel right. Like, they're basically different characters. And I think I finally figured out why I feel the way I do. And I think it has to do with the fact that these guys are all robots or animatronics, and these guys are all suits. That and the way that they are treated by the game. Once they're there, they're the only threat to deal with, feeling like a mini-boss in their respective areas. On top of that, these guys get emphasis on their personalities with voice lines and things like that, while these guys don't, making them feel like one character and these guys feel like separate characters. And I'm definitely not alone with this from what I can gather, so I think this is why there's so much confusion on who is and isn't the Mimic. Anyways, I just wanted to say that I'm aware that there are different personalities, but having said that, I do still think that the following idea could work. So, back to regular me, who rolls around on roller skates, and even then that's the only real difference. So, instead, here's what I suggest. Have the suits have different personalities and different weaknesses. This way you don't just have to see if a suit is moving, but also which suit is moving. It wouldn't be anything super complex, but to give an example, we could have one that has a sensitivity to light, which brings us back to the flashlight mechanic. The player could flash it in their eyes to stop them or slow them down. We could have a dinosaur mascot that plays into the whole "if you don't move, he can't see you" thing, going against the player's natural inclination to run away. There's more extreme things that could be done too with like non-humanoid suits, since in the books we read about the Mimic taking on all sorts of different forms. So there's a lot that could be done with these suits, but of course this would lead to some possible issues with rigging and animations, so I get why they'd want to stick to just humanoid suits. But with this system, it would keep the player on their toes even more so and add another element of strategy, almost like in classic FNAF, where each animatronic had to be treated differently. Now, on top of this, I also have a fun idea on how to introduce this system. I think the game would start out with 2 or 3 different suits in the starting areas, with the player pretty early on watching some tapes. This would be like a mandatory thing to progress forward, and here the player would watch some commercials for one of the products tied into the mascots. For this example, let's just say a cereal tied to the mascot, where we see him trying to steal the cereal from the kid like we know some other mascots to do. And so to keep him at bay, they flash a light in his face. This tells the player in a fun, diegetic way how to keep that suit at bay without feeling like the game is holding your hand. By the way, I'm a sucker for diegetic tutorials. So that's just an idea. I think it could be really fun and make sense in-universe, since the Mimic is copying their personalities, and that would then also include their weaknesses. Now, I'm not saying that every single suit needs this, because then things would start looking like UCN pretty quickly. I think the best thing to do here then is to reduce the amount of different suits there are, and have the unfinished suits act as a sort of neutral character, like he does normally in the game. Since the suits aren't finished yet, the Mimic wouldn't know what character they are, and thus what personality to give it. So, that's my main big change that I'd make to the Mimic himself. Give some more character and personality to the suits by having them act in different ways with their own individual weaknesses. Editor Rio here again. So with that suggestion out of the way, I'd like to also offer a solution for the previously mentioned issue, with being unsure who is and isn't the Mimic. Which brings us to the eyes. Just like what I said earlier with the suits, all the characters should have the Mimic's eyes visible, communicating to them that these are all indeed the same character chasing you. The eyes could sort of act as a universal symbol for "this is the Mimic." We see it with Jackie once she gets crushed, but not with the other ones for some reason. Now, on top of that, I'd also like to suggest one more change, since I think that the issue on why it's so confusing has to do with the fact that these are robots while the others are suits. So, the simple solution, I would actually suggest turning all of them into suits. At the end of the day, Secret of the Mimic is essentially a horror version of Jim Henson's workshop, with MCM mostly renting out suits, so it feels like these guys are just kind of here because, well, it's FNAF, so we needed animatronics. So, I think focusing on the suits rather than the robots would work best. It would work quite easily for Dolly and Jackie, making Jackie just a more plush Jack-in-the-Box, and making Dolly a sort of walking around mascot for the recycling center for advertisers and investors, like one that walks around and gives hugs. The one that I'm not sure how I would handle is Big Top. Like, he's clearly inspired or even literally supposed to be what Music Man becomes. So either make him his own unique character with a reason for being violent, or just at least show us how the Mimic is controlling him. Like, how? I mean, regardless, I think he is unique enough that he could be his own character. And Jackie is cool, but underutilized. It's really just you that I have a problem with. Now, the only other character that I haven't talked about is... And this section of the game was great. No comment, it was terrifying, it was paranormal, it was a lot of the stuff that I missed in the FNAF franchise. So A+. Oh, and also I forgot to talk about these guys, but honestly, I would have just scrapped this section entirely. Or at least like made it somewhat scary or corrupt or haunted or something. I don't know, it just feels like an unskippable cutscene. So yeah, those are the changes I'd make regarding the Mimic. Sorry for all the side tensions. Now, one thing I've noticed in the game is the odd structure regarding danger and safety. In the beginning, I was pretty cautious moving around, but as the game went on, I quickly realized that the game's structure often fell into safe area with dangerous area, go fetch thing in dangerous area, and bring to safe area. And I think that becomes a bit stale as the game goes on, not necessarily in the sense of gameplay fun, but in the sense of fear. Most of the game I felt pretty safe, honestly, since I knew that if I was behind a data diver door, God, try saying that 10 times quickly, or a room that didn't have many suits, I was almost guaranteed to be safe. So I was trying to think of fun ways to make the game scarier, or to make the player more on edge. And so I was thinking that, what if the player was never truly safe? And with that concept in mind, I'd like to pitch a few ideas. First of all, the Mimic can open data diver doors, or at the very least try to. Imagine you've made it into the office, but he saw you enter. You hear the footsteps chasing you. You see his hand claw underneath the door, trying to lift it up slowly, and you have to act quickly to shut it using your data diver, until you hear his footsteps go away. Now let's elaborate on this idea, and give the Mimic a few entrances into the office. Maybe some side vents the player has to manage. This is starting to look familiar, no? I think you guys see where I'm going with this. This way, the player has to shift their focus from stealth gameplay to defensive gameplay, while the Mimic tries to get inside the office. Now, it's not a guarantee that he'll try to get in, but if he saw you go in, or Dispatch is talking and he heard it, then he'll definitely try to make his way in. This makes sure that the player is always on edge in these supposedly safe areas, all while paying homage to the original gameplay style in bite-sized sections. Editor Rio here again. I know they tried doing this in Security Breach, but that didn't really work out due to the clunky nature of the Fazwatch and the poor AI. But I feel like this would work well in this more linear experience. Also, this wouldn't be the case for every office and room. I do think that there have to be some areas that are safe, and I think we could do this by having separate, stronger doors that the Mimic can't open. And this would also be used in some other areas in the game where the player does truly need to be safe for a bit. And to top it all off, I think the Mimic shouldn't be able to get you, or essentially be frozen while you're playing Moon.exe, or just using the computer in general. My ultimate goal here is to make the game scarier and more fun, not so much harder, so it should be quite easy to keep him at bay in the offices, but still something that the player has to consider and keep an eye out for. So, back to me. Now, the last thing I have in mind is regarding New Game Plus, which connects back to the idea of having different suits, having different playstyles. I imagine the suits will be introduced one by one throughout the game, and as they do, the game gets harder, with the player having to think more strategically. I imagine the twist with New Game Plus would be that all the suits are potential threats right off the bat, since the player now knows how they all work, making New Game Plus a harder difficulty. Now maybe some extra things could be added to make the game even harder, essentially making it a 20-20-20 mode of Secret of the Mimic, since I feel like hard mode or challenge modes is something that's been missing in recent FNAF entries, and is something that people liked, or at the very least liked to watch. Overall, I feel like these changes serve to make the game scarier and more replayable. There's a few more things I'd like to change, like the Chica section, and how instead of just Jackie, we should have had something like this for the advertising, but I feel like this video has gone on long enough. So yeah, those are all the changes I'd personally make to Secret of the Mimic to improve it as much as I can while still keeping true to what it was. Let me know what you guys think. Would you like to see these changes? And if not, what changes do you think would have been cool to add instead? Again, I really did enjoy the game. I just figured that I'd make this video as a sort of creative outlet for all the ideas in here. And Steel will feel free to use any of these ideas in future entries, or, if you need another game designer on the team.